Hello, XJW Bible Bites here. Oh, this is going to be a channel update and unscripted testimonial video for today. Though, as far as channel updates go, I've been more busy over the last couple weeks, so I've been reshuffling my schedule and figuring out where to fit certain things and trying to make time for stuff. But going forward, with this channel, I want to do a either weekly or bi-weekly treasures video, and I'm very much amazed how much I learn even for myself from doing research on these passages, how much you see when you're not stuck in Watchtower's filtered box. And then either weekly or for as long as I still have a story to tell or thoughts, a testimonial, and then probably on a monthly basis a longer video under the for consideration category where I'll either do a review of a video, a book, manuscript, paper, whatever, or a sermon on a biblical subject. Something like that. I just don't have the time or the resources really to do daily videos on this stuff. But for today, this testimony is going to be about why I could not stay as a witness, why I could not stay or remain part of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, as a PMO or otherwise. So, as a brief recap, I was born into the religion, raised in it. I did not know any other way of doing things, really, and I think we all get stuck. When we live a life and it's all we've ever known, it can be problematic to move out. But my generation, as much as everyone does like to make fun of millennials and Zoomers, we have access to a resource that the generations behind us did not have for most of their lives in the form of the internet. And of course, everything on the internet is true. No, but it introduces us to other thoughts, ideas, people. Just as an example from my childhood, I played a very popular, massive multiplayer online game called RuneScape. Now, it was popular because it was cheap and you could run it off of a potato. But in that game, I met all kinds of people, all different ages, of all different backgrounds from all over the world, and it really opened up your eyes. And later, in online communities, forums, other games, and things like that, you meet so many people that you never would have had a chance to talk with, get to know, work with, even if it's just in the virtual space. You never would have had this opportunity were it not for the internet and the existence of these products. Now, video games, I believe for the most part, are a waste of time, and I do not game nearly as much as I used to, if at all. And I've made, of my own free will, I've made serious changes to what I consider to be entertainment. There are certain things where it's not a drudgery to not do it, to give up and stuff like that. Since I left the witnesses, I just don't have interest in them anymore. I have been much more interested in actual spiritual matters and biblical matters. Like, this is now my entertainment, and people. Or I think this is now my purpose, my interest. Many of the products of Hollywood and programmers and stuff like that, they don't interest me anymore. But for my preteen and teen years, I was. And I learned that whether you're from Russia or China, Australia, Hawaii, Brazil, Mexico, the Netherlands, UK, Canada, United States, Nigeria, people, when you dig beneath the very shallow surface of culture and language and even religion, people are people. And we all have common interests, life, liberty, and happiness, even though some of us are very confused about how we go about that. And there is a swath of the population that has disorders that move them to doing self-destructive behaviors that also destroy other people. But for the most part, humanity, we are just humans. And as I continued to grow in my explorations, as I've mentioned before, I learned that there are other people out there who are now, some are religious, but others, many of them have no denomination as far as Christianity goes, but they really know their scriptures, they know their stuff, they're true believers. And I learned it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. And even as a young child, I remember I was at a mall and I was watching a bunch of young children and parents with infants and stuff going up to meet the Easter Bunny, so it must have been around springtime. I was very young. And it was commented to me, it's really sad that they're all going to die at Armageddon. And it kind of traumatized me, and it really bothered me, even though I didn't make any expression at the time. But I didn't believe it. Now, obviously, I'm not the judge. I don't know who, or I'm not in charge of who the elect are going to be and who they're not going to be, or the saints, depending on the translation you want to say. But I, even at that young age, already knew that God, even if the flesh and the soul were destroyed, the spirits, it, I already knew and had been trained about God's qualities, and I knew that He wouldn't do things without good reason, and I didn't believe that He would do something that would be unjust. So I never believed the witness doctrine that everyone who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness was going to be destroyed because it never made any sense to me. Now, when I was trying to figure out their dogma with the Bible of having to do the whole preaching work and having it cover like the ends of the earth, and everyone had to receive a witness. And if they didn't, then they could be destroyed at Armageddon, and you would be blood guilty for that if you failed in your duty to carry out the preaching work, which is one of their teachings. And it didn't make any sense to me. So as part of that cognitive dissonance of how could we possibly reach every single person on the planet before the appointed time that only the Father knows, and it it didn't click. It's really not feasible from a human perspective, and you have the justification or excuse of supernatural help. But is God really going to destroy people just because they haven't heard from witnesses, like some tribe, isolated tribe living deep in the Amazons or the jungles of Sub-Saharan Africa, something like that? I'm looking at the map on my wall. Is it's bull. So getting back on topic, why I couldn't stay as a Jehovah's Witness. Once I learned that the doctrines were false, and as they love to illustrate poison and mixing in poison with water or milk or bread as that helper to the governing body, um, did with that little game that he played with having the teaching committee bring in poison and bread and everything, which I that just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Um, a lot of the stuff now, the artwork, the language that they use, the motions they make with their hands, or body language and facial expressions and stuff like that gives me the screaming willies. Now that I have the knowledge and the perception to pay attention to it. I was a witness. I didn't even know the names of all the governing bodies. I think the only one I really knew was Jackson because he had the Australian accent. So he kind of stood out. I didn't, yeah, I just didn't pay attention to them. I didn't know the names of a lot of these bishops. I mean, helpers to the governing body and everything like that. I knew their voices and their faces, but I was never concerned with the men. It was irrelevant. It didn't matter to me. And I really only started paying attention after I woke up as a witness. I was always focused on the Bible, Jesus, his father, everything like that. But once I learned how many of these doctrines are either completely false or only about 30 to 70% of the truth with lies mixed in, which is something that a lot of religions do. They might have fractions of the truth, but they're either missing pieces, they ignore things they don't like, or they just don't teach the whole thing. Like one pastor, he is very genuine from the heart, but I thought it was interesting. He cut out or refused to read the latter half of Ezekiel 18:4. And that's a very common thing. And there's a difference between cutting things out for time and relevancy and cutting things out because you don't want to address it in the Bible, whether it's awkward or what have you. And the Watchtower loves to cut and edit and pull things out of context to justify its doctrines, and I couldn't abide that. So that was one of the reasons I couldn't stay. Is I have always, now I haven't always had the truth, but I have always been a truth seeker from the heart. And I have obviously crusaded for the wrong causes before. And I'm a lot more careful now with how I will present things, or at least I try to be, I think. But I cannot abide untruths, misdirections, false dogma, and doctrine. And it ain't just a religious thing either. It is the same exact tactics and manipulations and Justinian deceptions that the Watchtower and other such organizations use. The same exact things are used by academia, whether it's Nature, National Geographic, anything like that. Like some of my favorite films growing up was a lot of stuff that had to do with dinosaurs and the Ice Age and other things like that. And even back then, I could catch where, as a kid, they're pulling this out of their butt. So it was more of an entertainment thing for me, was how can you possibly know that? And later learning many of those things, whether they're school textbooks, uh, science articles from Nature, which I used to spend a lot of time on, not as much now, National Geographics, zoo books, stuff like that. A lot of it's outdated. Now it's old light. So the old light thing and the same old light excuse is used by the scientific community as also used by Watchtower and the religious community, which is fascinating to me. Is humans, we have a hardwired need for spirituality. You take that out, something has to fill it. If they're a diehard anti-theist, atheist, or agnostic, then they're going to fill it with something, whether it's politics or the different branches of science. So you can have natural, social, and formal sciences, and underneath that are all the different branches. Something is going to fill a void. The universe hates a vacuum. And I think it's fascinating the correlation in a lot of these documentaries or papers where I can catch where they're fudging stuff, making assumptions, interpretations, interpolations, everything like that. And they use, well, science advances and it changes its doctrine and everything, and we should be happy for that. Doesn't society say the same exact thing? is they love trashing on the Catholic Church, even though they're pretty much, well, not pretty much the same thing, but they're more similar than they are different. And they say, well, shouldn't you be happy to be part of a religion that changes its doctrines when it figures out that it's wrong? And here's the thing of in the scientific community and academia, the problem is the same exact thing in the religious community of when so-called facts, theories, and other such things are taught as doctrine. When they are indoctrinated into the youth, and later it's old light and has to be thrown in the garbage. Just as one example to try to not start a fire in the comments section, Egyptian chronology and Neanderthals. There are more than enough reasons, nothing to do with the Bible, to suspect that Egyptian chronology has been extended by hundreds of years. Manetho, which I actually have his full and collect works along with other scholars like him on my shelf there, the way he recorded the northern and southern kingdoms was, it appears he wrote them as being successive, when in reality many of these dynasties were actually parallel. So the math is wrong. So a lot of these assumptions and calculations and calibrations are based off of wrong information. And then you have issues with the Sothic cycle and their cyclic view of time. If you want to research it, go ahead and do it yourself. It's not the subject of this video. But there's data to support that our Egyptian chronology is wrong. But the scientific community, like many impacted doctrines that it teaches, doesn't want to change because of human arrogance, pride, stubbornness, or not wanting to have to go through and change the textbooks or admit that you are teaching incorrect information, as a professor your whole life. The thing is, Neanderthals, if you're going to be forcing school children to learn something, school choice, all this stuff, if you're going to be forcing children to be indoctrinated with something, shouldn't you be sure that it's correct? And how many of you were taught in your textbooks when you were younger, especially, that Neanderthals looked like some ape hybrid with the big forehead and the racially biased features on their faces, which also come out of the racist eugenicist roots of evolution. But you were taught that Neanderthals look like ape men. And in all these museums, these textbooks, you see artistic representations of these ape creatures, these very simian-looking hominids. Completely inaccurate. Completely inaccurate. Modern technology and forensic reconstruction has now shown they were actually incredibly handsome and robust human beings. Never mind the fact, if they were a different species, they couldn't form viable offspring. The debate of what is a species is really quite simple. If it can make offspring that can make offspring that can make offspring, it is the same species. It is not a different species. Neanderthals were humans, humans were Neanderthals. Why do we complicate this? Because of religious doctrine. Sorry, scientific doctrine. Neanderthals look like people. So how many school children thought that they looked like ape people for how long? And that was completely inaccurate. Another thing, I don't know if anyone here has had the experience of seeing like a bloated carcass in the water, like a whale carcass or something. But in many of your school textbooks, it was taught that a giant creature dies in the water, and it goes to the bottom and it gets covered in layers of sediment over very long periods of time, and over hundreds of thousands to millions of years, it fossilizes and gets preserved. Okay, there's a problem with that, is there are microbes and small creatures and birds and sharks and fish and everything that rip apart these carcasses in the water. Even the bones. There are worms that subsist entirely off of whale bones and stuff in the ocean. And then you cross that with polystrate fossils where you have trees, fossilized trees that go through what in other circumstances would be considered 6 to 7 figures of years worth of strata. It's just there are inconsistencies here. So if you're going to teach something to kids as a fact and indoctrinate them, teach the inconsistencies as well, teach the other side of it, or don't teach it at all. You should really have this solidified. Peking Man, Nebraska Man, all those fraudulent missing links, is teach both sides of it. And many people, they go into their adult lives thinking that the things they learned in school or university were correct, and they were not. Napoleon was tall for the era. He was actually above average in height. The notion that he was short and had little man syndrome was British propaganda. So many people are walking around believing things that are true and are not, whether it's scientific or it's religious, like with the Bible. And I have always been a truth seeker, and even though some things I change faster than others, I've always been willing to adjust my view and present it with new information. And it was the same thing with the witnesses, even though because of being born into it and because of the indoctrination mind control methods that they use, it took me longer, or it took longer for me to be broken out of it. And as many people wake up, I think we dangerously get carried away. And I think it's really rooted in trauma or emotions. Is when we wake up to the truth about this organization or religion or other things, I believe many of us are motivated to apostatize to the polar opposite direction and assume everything you thought you knew, learned, or were raised with was a bunch of bunk, and you immediately start listening to people where all they want to do is criticize and present other sides of it, whether it's inaccurate or accurate, and we shut our minds to other things. So for me, when I woke up, that was a rough week, but I immediately started researching. And every doctrine had to be questioned, even though there were some that I was very hesitant to get into. And there were brief periods of time where there were certain doctrines that Christians believe and witnesses don't, where I found very strong arguments for them. And I could have been led down certain paths, and I found very strong arguments against the Bible itself, and I could have been led down that path. But I did more counter-checking, and I found counterpoints, counter-arguments, apologetics, and I've made my choices to these. Most people don't do that, whether it's a lack of time and energy, or they're just so crushed in their spirit that they just can't bring themselves to do it and they just want it to be over, is don't rush your journey. And don't get sucked right into another cult, another religion, whether it's secular or not. And so many people, I see them doing this. And it makes me very sad, especially the ones that have gone away from Christ. Because now what? Now what? And atheism, agnosticism is a subject for another video. But why I couldn't remain as a PMO? Because I'm a truth seeker. And every time I would log on to the Zoom meetings or Zoom service and I would hear them talking about bullcrap being spewed by the media and over, and these silly things, negativity, negativity, and hearing doctrines I knew were false from men who I knew were liars, and there are other people in my little group at the time who thought that maybe they just deceived themselves, maybe they were men just trying to do their best. I didn't feel that way. I did for a couple days, and then very shortly after that, I came to my own conclusion of they are evil and they know exactly what they are doing, but they're also stuck. And I couldn't remain in that environment. To have to put on a face, play a game, deliver parts from the platform talks, especially ones that were already mindlessly pre-built from the society without being able to freely express. And obviously it's not about this, but when I would get something where I could go off the reservation or off the rails of the Watchtower's machine, I would get so many more comments and texts and stuff like that than anything presented from the Sleepy Watchtower. And that also helped continue to wake me up. Was if you're having a hard time staying awake with something, like at meetings and stuff, that really should be a clue at some point. And I had gotten to the point where it's like this is just the same information over and over. It's not encouraging me. It's not interesting. It's sad. And I'd start going off and doing other things, whether it's my own research or just not really paying attention because it was nothing I hadn't heard before. I don't know what these people are taking notes with. Every assembly and convention we go to, it has a new name and it's the same information over and over. And it was gradually, very early, I was woken up to propaganda, whether it's by my parents, whether it's in advertisements. My mother would literally point out to me, whether it was a Coke ad or something on Nickelodeon, of here's how they're manipulating you, here, here, and here, and how they're doing it. And when I was woken up to the fact that the society was doing the same exact thing, I couldn't abide by it anymore. But most people, it's like they can't see it. Almost like there's a spell or a fog or a darkness that they are under. They can't see these things. And I don't understand the conclusions that some people come to, the decisions that they make, which they're free to. I don't understand them sometimes, especially if they have to do with doctrinal matters or, trusting humans in authority and how they can go from being under the governing body and then directly put themselves in the same exact situation again. I know some of the reasons why on a macro basis, if not on an individual basis, why they do it, not wanting to take self-responsibility, having the comfort of, having that guide, the training wheels with them, that kind of thing. Because free flying is quite scary. I had that when I moved out of my parents' house years and years ago, where that very first night in my first apartment, I had a hard time sleeping because like this is it. I'm At the time I thought in my head on my own. Now I wasn't really, but it was such a weird feeling, and I think people are terrified of this. They're terrified of actually being free in liberty and not having the training wheels with them. And fear is the enemy of growth and advancement. And it's really not so bad. As witnesses, if you're still in and you're listening to this, yeah, there's a lot of, more than you probably know, there's a lot of very bad things being engineered and going on in the world right now. Stuff I can't even talk about here. That's been told to me by people who've been correct time and time again. And that's how I don't understand how people who don't have their faith in Jesus, how they deal with this. Well, alcohol, but is, yeah, I guess everyone has their coping mechanisms. They ignore it. They don't want to hear it. Witnesses are very much like that, where, they just don't want to hear it. They just want to, and ostriches don't really do this, but they want to stick their head in the sand and just play the ostrich of, if I can't see it, it can't see me, kind of silly thinking. And it's just very childish. But alcohol, that reminded me. I'm sorry if I've been all over the place in this video. This is very impromptu. But when I was a witness for it wasn't until probably about the last year of being a witness that I started, but I started drinking more and more. And I inherited my grandmother's liver because I could down, this is 13.5%, I could down one of these in a sitting and be up for Zoom service the next day. Plus like rum or tequila, anything like that. And if you're at a point in your life where whatever you're a part of, organization, your family, your circle, if like that is driving you to do things like that, then you need to take a step back and acknowledge that this place is probably not for you. And the witness organization was simply not an organization for me. Now, other than communion, I don't really drink anymore, maybe a beer on the weekends after work. But since leaving enslavement to the Watchtower, I have not felt the need to use drugs to escape, video games to escape, um, any other coping mechanisms that people have. And it's almost like if you have a rash on your skin and then you finally figure out what the problem is, it's a laundry detergent or a soap or something like that, and you get rid of it, and it's so relieving. And this is so relieving not to have these thorns anymore. And the dissonance of you're being told that you're in a loving organization with people who love you conditionally. And this is God's holy organization. It's a spiritual paradise. But these people, because it's not, these people are being driven insane. They're being driven mad. And it makes me very sad. And we just had, I loved listening to the interview. And I'm so sorry. Names, I forget my own name sometimes. So I don't mean any disrespect. I can't remember his name. But it was an interview with a father who left the witnesses. He was a former elder. He was a burly looking guy. He had a beard, um, a man's man kind of man. And I heard, or at least I was told on the grapevine, that he may have committed suicide. And it made me very sad to hear. But I know that someone who recently was in a bunch of interviews in the XJW community just recently committed suicide. And it made me so sad how evil this organization is and how it drives so many people to suicide because of its policies. And if any regular corporation tried to get away with these kind of abuses in this modern era, it would never stand. But because they're hiding underneath the guise of being a religion, and they're hiding underneath the skirts of religious expression and freedom and lying and presenting two faces to whatever supposed authorities, and to their members. For now, they've been getting away with it. So that's why I'm not going to stop. I'm absolutely not going back to that dusty dead religion. The last Zoom meeting I was in was the night I recorded the no longer Jehovah's Witness announcement when we left. And it was so dusty, dry, and dead. It's an overcooked steak. And I'm not going back to that table of demons. I'm sitting at the table of Christ now. And real history, real Bible is so much more interesting than the garbage, the indoctrinated garbage that you're being fed. And I couldn't stay because it's evil and I couldn't be a part of it. As much as I did entertain thoughts of helping or trying to feed seeds, and while I was there, I did. But the response by so many who know me so well in the congregation, I don't know that it would have done any good. And I think we'll have to continue this in a part 2 of why I couldn't stay because this video is getting pretty long. But those are my thoughts for now. And now I'm going into my brooding state, so I'm not going to be able to talk as efficiently. And it's probably going to drive people nuts. So that's all for today. And like I said, going forward, I want there to be either weekly or bi-weekly a treasures, a testimony, and then monthly a consideration. I hope you're all having a good day, and I hope you all have a good night.